I'm out of breath running.
I'm just waiting for it to register that it's live. It is. Okay, there we go. Well, everyone. Hello, everyone. I am Jacob Berman. Welcome to Religion 101, and I am joined once again by Christopher Lawson. How are you doing?
Hello, welcome everybody. Good to be here.
So today we're going to be discussing Dead Sea Scrolls versus the New Testament. That happens to be the title of this video. So basically, we're going to be getting into additional parallels between the Dead Sea Scrolls and the New Testament rewrites of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and so on and so on. So, without further ado, Christopher Lawson, why don't you take us deeper into this finding Jesus in the Dead Sea Scrolls and the additional parallels that is
Okay,
there?
and I'm glad you said deeper because this is a comparative study. It's a follow-up video on the video we've already done recently together with James Valiant and the two of us. And you want to give a plug for what that video is called so they can find it, our viewers?
Yeah, it's called Judas the Galilean, the father of Jesus, and the Dead Sea Scrolls with Christopher Lawson and Valiant. I'll have the link
Okay,
to that video appear after the stream.
excellent. So now, if you're just joining us and you're wondering the context of this video, you can watch that video and see where we were beginning. We had a long discussion of Jesus as being the son of Judah the Galilean. Just as a quick recap before we get into the scroll details, let's just give a quick recap for our viewers. Josephus said there was a revolutionary named Judah the Galilean, and he and his buddy named Zadok, or righteous one, uh, did a tax revolt in 6 CE. This got Judah the Galilean crucified. Judah the Galilean was said to be a sophistes, that means a wise man. He was said to be the founder of one of the sects of Judaism. When Josephus described the sects as four different kinds of sects, he included the sect that Judah the Galilean had developed. This sect came to be known as the Zealots because they were zealous for the law. This zeal meant that these people were making demands concerning the high priesthood. They wanted it to be a high priest operating who knew the Mosaic law, knew the rituals, and knew all the purity rules. And so these people were demanding purity. These people were not criminals the way the Zealots were portrayed. These people were very strict, very conservative religious enthusiasts. They were very, very devout. And so it was an offense against their religion that made them rebel against Rome. When Rome came into Judea, they brought with them some of their equipment, and that equipment was breaking the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments, most important rules in Judaism, include rules about idols and no images. Well, the shields and the standards and even the money of the Romans had these images which were prohibited by Torah. And so some Hellenistic Jews were allowing it and putting up with it, and the most conservative Jews were saying, no, we're not putting up with it, and we'll die to stop it if necessary. And that's the Jews that were writing the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's also the Jews that had a righteous king, and that king initially was Judah the Galilean himself. Josephus said that Judah the Galilean had royal aspirations. Now, Judah the Galilean was hidden as a child when his father was taken and destroyed. His father Hezekiah was killed by Pompey in making way for Herod the Great to take rule over ancient Judea. Now, so these guys were in hiding. Judah the Galilean survived the destruction of his father because he wasn't advertising himself. He was hidden as a child. Now, when Judah the Galilean got caught, if he had to have a child because this sect had a rule that they would never be without a king, and they took that rule seriously. So their king wouldn't even go in public until he had an heir hidden away. So we can safely assume that Judah the Galilean did indeed have a son being part of the sect. Now, it happens that this sect did say that they still had a king after Judah the Galilean was caught. They had a king, and it was a king that came to them as a teacher of righteousness who began his teaching with them after a 20-year period. Now, if that 20-year period, they say they were wandering in the wilderness for 20 years like blind men, I suggest that this happened after Judah the Galilean died. When Judah the Galilean died, his son was still too young to take control, and so the sectarians were wandering in the wilderness like blind men for 20 years. Judah the Galilean died in 6 CE. That means this period for when the Dead Sea Scroll unique teacher arrived was 26 CE when he began his teaching, and the scrolls say that he taught them the way, the very term that is used in the New Testament about the Jesus teachings. What he taught is what Jesus was said to have taught, the way. That's haderach in Hebrew. It's equivalent to the Greek hodos in the New Testament. So I was suggesting that Jesus, since he was being presented as a king in the New Testament and all the stories, the sign over the cross, the birth stories and all the allegations there, the whole kingdom preaching while he's there, all of these ideas say king, king, king. And if Jesus really was the king, then he had to be the son of the previous king. And this sect seems to be Jesus's sect. And today's discussion will be evidence to that effect, that this is the sect out of all the sects in Judaism that matches with Jesus's sect. The differences between what the New Testament says about it, though, and what the Dead Sea Scrolls say about it, they all talk about the same issues. Now, this is really important. They discuss the same things one after another. They switch them over, they change them. The New Testament doesn't take the same view. The New Testament is making a twist on the story, and the New Testament came later. The Dead Sea Scrolls are actually 1st century. They actually contain parables, which proves that they can't really go way back in time, too much further than the 1st century. There are Dead Sea Scrolls like the biblical texts which do go back in time because they kept those texts a long time. And the texts that we found were the ones that had gotten old even for them, and they'd thrown away into a place that they call a genitza. A genitza is a storage place for texts that you're throwing away. You didn't throw them in a garbage dump because they were too holy to treat like trash. So you let God take care of their fate and put them in the hands of God by finding a place for them to just let God decide what's going to happen to them. That's what a genitza was. And so when we go and find their biblical texts, of course, those texts are the oldest ones, or a century or 2 centuries or 3 centuries before. They've been sitting there piling up and rotting, and they take a long, long time. They hadn't even completely rotted by the time they got to our time. There's still parts remaining of them. So these things last a long, long time, and so we can expect them. They intended them to last a long time. They went to a lot of work to do this writing, the copying job, the making of the ink itself, every little pen, every feather quill tip having to be continually resharpened because the work was so precise. They went through a lot of work to make these scrolls. So of course they were going to find the most durable material possible for them to write on. So now we must recognize that this sect was a Jewish sect, and like I said, they were the purists. They were the ones who were standing up for Torah. We're willing even to fight Rome because we believe the Torah rules are so important that we will even take on a monster power that every nation on earth trembles before, and we will not bow to them because they only bow when Torah tells them to bow.
Right.
And so this sect was very, very strong. Torah was the most important thing. And I said, well, if they're so Jewish, why do I say they're like Jesus? Well, they talk about angels. Well, that can't be the Sadducees. The New Testament itself says the Sadducees don't believe in angels. And the New Testament itself says Sadducees don't believe in resurrection. Well, this sect believed in resurrection. And this sect also believed in something else. This sect mentions a term, Ruach Kodesh, all the time, over and over and over again. And this term means Holy Spirit. This term, Holy Spirit, can be found in some Jewish writings. If you look hard enough, you'll find it some places, maybe 3 or 4 times in hundreds and hundreds of years of Jewish writings around that time. You'll maybe find it 3 or 4 times if you're lucky, and you're going to have to really search hard to find the term Holy Spirit. But in the Dead Sea Scrolls, you find this term page after page after page, dozens of times, hundreds of times. This is significantly different. This is a new sect with a new term. This is a key sectarian term, the Holy Spirit. And yet, this now shows up in the New Testament as a distinctive part of the preaching of Jesus's disciples. They were preaching about Holy Spirit. Now, the visionary scrolls of Qumran, in our last video, we cited the songs of the Sabbath sacrifice. I invite our viewers to go back to that video and listen to that songs of the Sabbath sacrifice. It's a heavenly ascent vision, and it shows how the sectarians had an entheogenic Eucharist that allowed them to have an experience unlike anything the Eucharist has ever given modern day Christians. This experience allowed them to feel like they had left their body, similar to what Paul had said, I knew a man once, whether I was in my body or not at the time, I'm not sure. This kind of experience. So this whole experience gave them a new definition of the soul. Also, do not be afraid of someone who can destroy the body but can't kill the soul. It used to be that man was made and the breath of life was breathed into him, man became a soul. So the old idea was man was a soul. The new idea was man had a soul. And this new idea came out of these entheogenic experiences where they went up to the heavenly sanctuary together. So these people believed in angels because they believed they saw them. They believed that the soul could live outside of the body. They believed in the Holy Spirit. This is a sect of Judaism that is very, very unique, and it matches Christianity, the issues that Christianity came to deal with. You can't expect the rewritten version, the New Testament, the Roman version, to be the same as the Dead Sea Scroll version. But the fact that they take on all the same issues one after another shows exactly what group these Romans were trying to address. Right. If you're checking all the boxes on one particular group, for example, this sect, like I said, had a righteous king. The term righteous king itself became a sectarian key phrase for Christians. And because it was used in the Old Testament as the name of a priest, Melchizedek, the word Melchizedek, okay, is the Aramaic way of saying Malach Zadok in Hebrew. And both of these mean righteous king. There are many terms like this in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They use like Messiah of righteousness, and other similar equivalent terms. This became a term for Jesus, according to Paul. Paul calls Jesus Melchizedek and his priesthood after Melchizedek. Now, Paul twists it because Paul uses Melchizedek in the Old Testament as an ethereal person that you don't hear who his ancestors were, and you never ever hear what happened to him. So we don't know where he came from, we don't know where he went to. He's kind of ethereal, and Jesus is that kind of person. And so that's the kind of Melchizedek Jesus was. But once again, it's the New Testament trying to give an explanation for a Dead Sea Scroll terminology that they were having an issue with. And the real issue deals with the king, the righteous king. Now, the Dead Sea Scroll idea of a righteous king is easy for anyone to understand when we know this was the sect that was training all the lower priesthood. We know that the lower priesthood signaled the war against Rome with their cessation of offerings for the emperor, and that was a signal to start the war in 66 CE. Now, interestingly enough, we said earlier that the timing on the Dead Sea Scrolls said the teacher of righteousness began his ministry in 26 CE, and we got that from the 20 years after the date of Judas the Galilean. The real historical date of Judas the Galilean and that tax revolt is known, so we got a historical anchor to set to our calendar. 26 CE for the beginning of the public ministry of the teacher of righteousness of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Exactly 40 years after he began his open teaching, they began their open revolt in 66 CE. Exactly 40 years. The timing matches. The reenactment of the Exodus thing again. Exactly now, they said that this war would come to a culmination and the teacher would resurrect at the very last minute and bring them the victory. They expected that victory by 70 CE, according to the timing of when they started the war. And they did the starting of the war, so we can use their timing. And it only matters what this sect thought of the timing, not anybody else's dating. So they expected this war to culminate by 70 CE, and that would be 40 years, they thought, after the death of their righteous teacher. That means the death of the righteous teacher in the Dead Sea Scrolls was 30 CE. Again, it's an exact match for the dating of Jesus. So again, the parallels, it's not just the themes are the same, but the timing is identical. Very, very significant. Now, when you add to the fact that this group had a sacred meal of bread and wine, that they used rank. Now, that's an interesting thing. You don't hear about the Sadducees using rank. Now, the Pharisees used rank. We know they did, but not in formal ways. They kind of informally adopted it by their positions that they took in the synagogue each Sabbath. But the rank in the Dead Sea Scrolls sect was a real thing, and you could give orders to somebody of lower rank. This was very much a military training program, and the scroll of the sons of light against the sons of darkness, the war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness, shows how they intended to use their rank and their training as a military, functioning military in a real war against a real functioning military, the greatest functioning military of all time up to that point in world history, the Romans. The idea that Jesus was their king matches so many things, including the idea that the New Testament says, what did Jesus do when he was preaching? What did he preach about? His kingdom. What was he asked about? His kingdom. Everything again says king, king, king. But the New Testament makes it an otherworldly kingdom. Again, this is a rewrite. The Romans are trying to pacify a developing Jewish mythology about Jesus. Jesus was a historical person. He was just a human being, but he was a human that they thought was empowered by God. He thought it apparently of himself, and his followers believed him. And they wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. And they started a war apparently because of it. And when they lost the war, that is when Judaism, at least that sect of Judaism, lost their faith in Jesus. The other sect of Judaism didn't have faith in Jesus to begin with, but this sect did. And when they lost the war, they weren't talking about Jesus anymore. The other variation of the Jesus story, the New Testament variation, the Pauline variation, that was going on in Asia Minor. After the war, this sect that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls, they no longer existed. They were wiped out of history completely by that war. The Romans were very thorough, and it wasn't just in Judea where they did the war. They fought over into Jordan. They fought over down into Egypt. They went and they ransacked the city of On because there was an alternative temple of Judaism there, and a lot of the zealots went down there thinking this would be a safe place because of the prophecies in Isaiah that in the final days there would be another temple, etc. And the Romans went after them. They went down into Alexandria, and the Alexandrian Jews of a Hellenistic bent said, look, here you go, Romans. We don't want any trouble with you, Rome. And they offered them up and got rid of them that way. Anybody who was part of the original sect of the Dead Sea Scroll group, if they survived, they were in hiding. They weren't out preaching a different story about Jesus anymore. They were in hiding for their lives. So only the Pauline group would have been dominating, and they went around reconstructing Paul's writings that had fallen out of favor after Paul had died and James' group had taken domination. Well, James had sent his entourage around the churches in Asia Minor and made sure that these people were becoming good Jews. That whole oversight was gone after the war, and that's when Paul came back into vogue. And all the Pauline schools started writing material in Paul's name. They put together 2 Corinthians out of 3 separate Pauline letters. Later on, the Pauline schools developed a very sophisticated, otherworldly theology, and you got the book of Hebrews is probably the most advanced form of Pauline theology, but it wasn't written by Paul. It was written by those of his school 50 years after Paul, maybe more than that. It's hard to know a dating for that, because that's very sophisticated and well-developed theology. Who knows if it wasn't still being tweaked right into the 4th century. So we don't know, because our earliest copies don't really go back before that. Then we've got apocalyptic expectation, the idea of the delay of the parousia. Mark's idea that some will be standing here and won't taste death until all these things will be fulfilled. Well, like I said, the Dead Sea Scroll sect had all their prophecies come to fulfillment by 70 CE, when you put their time charts together. And so after 70 CE, all that stuff was supposed to be fulfilled. And the only people from their group that survived past that time period didn't survive much longer. They were isolated in Masada. The leader of the Masada rebels,
Eleazar,
was alleged to be a grandson of Judas the Galilean, so that makes sense. He may in fact be where the name Lazarus first came into New Testament. If Jesus was the son of Judas the Galilean, then this Eleazar was probably Jesus's nephew. So that would make him a family member and make him one of Jesus's beloved family members, and could very well be a candidate for being Lazarus. And Lazarus and Eleazar, the names linguistically are cognates of one another. So it fits. We can't prove it, but it's theoretically possible. That's another thing too, is we are speculating, because that's how history is done. We give the evidence from which we make the speculations, and if enough of the pieces seem to lend towards the same direction on the speculation, we say, hey, maybe we're on the mark here. So far, every one of the pieces, including the timing and everything else, matches completely. Then when you take a look at the listing of Jesus's brothers, and it matches the names of Judas the Galilean's sons.
James and Simon.
I mean, yeah, exactly. That's okay. They're common names, but it's not a mismatch. In other words, it did not get negated, and that's something that you can double check on. And it's not a very big thing, but on the few things that we can double check on, it still fits, and that is important to say that we've got the right path, and it fits. We can't really say much more than that on it. But there are a lot of things in the Dead Sea Scroll community that match. The concept of the tax issues. Why was Jesus in the New Testament talking about taxes? This isn't something you would be expecting an apocalyptic preacher to be talking about, unless he has a political influence, a political agenda. Then you might bring up the subject of the taxes. But otherwise, why would he even be speaking it at all if he's talking about his kingdom and talking about other worldly things? Taxes are this worldly thing. That's contradictory to the whole theme of otherworldly. Jesus talking about taxes is this worldly. And that seems to be contradictory to the general theme. Why is it there? Because the real Jesus maybe was talking about the taxes. And we can't imagine that he would have had a lot of popularity that's alleged to him with the Jews, that he had a big following. If he was saying, go ahead and pay them, we really should pay them, guys, quit complaining about the Roman taxes. So
Right.
you can't have it both ways. Either Jesus had a big following, or Jesus spoke about the taxes. And if the only way you can have both is if he spoke about the taxes in a derogatory manner. The and it does, a derogatory interpretation does make sense. Render unto Caesar things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. Well, the things unto Caesar. What if Jesus said, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God's? You know, the totally different image, but we don't get that kind of thing. In the New Testament when you're reading it, we don't, because it's not trying to portray that. But if it was left as a vague epithet that's uncharacteristic, and it's too wimpy. The Dead Sea Scroll teacher was not a wimp. He was very, very much an enthusiast for whatever he was for. He was really, really for. And whatever he was against, he was really, really against. And the whole Dead Sea Scroll sect, in fact, said that you will judge your membership and how they advanced in rank by how much they love and how much they hate. If they don't really love Torah enough, they're not going to advance. If they don't really hate Romans enough, they're not going to advance. You need to have both if you want to get promoted in this sect. You got to really love God's side and really hate the other side. And you see this dichotomy in James, the Epistle of James. Whoever loves the world, well, that's the wrong direction. You got to love Torah. Whoever loves the world doesn't love God. Whoever loves God hates the world. You got to choose one or the other. This exactly fits the Dead Sea sect idea.
Absolutely.
So the tax issues, also the tax census was mentioned as part of Jesus's origin stories. It turns out that Jesus' origin as king does come down to the tax census issue, because his father died fighting a tax revolt against a tax census in 6 CE. So Judas the Galilean died fighting against the taxes, and it was fighting against the taxes that led to Jesus being king. So we can understand how a tax census works its way in an obscure manner into the origin stories for Jesus. Because where did the king come from? Oh, from this event, tax census. Oh, and that's how he became king. Okay. It's an indirect match again, but again with a twist in the New Testament. Furthermore, there's alleged to be an insurrection at the time of Jesus' arrest. And that's the whole Jesus Barabbas story comes in there, and people were alleged to have been killed, and that there were more than one people. It wasn't just one person. Apparently it was a large group that did this. Well, this matches other things in the Gospels' portrayal of Jesus. Jesus was said to have overturned the tables, again, a financial thing, of the coin collectors. Once again, Jesus versus the coins. And what was so special about the coins? It comes back to Torah. They had those images on that we started the conversation. Roman images were on some of those coins. And you're going to have some of those people coming in and taking Roman coins, and they're going to take them into the temple to trade. A historical Jesus would upset that. And how could he have gotten away with that unless he had supporters? And unless the lower priesthood, in righteous indignation, were backing him up in the temple. That's the only way that story could even have happened. And Jesus walk out alive. As if he had a lot of backup. Or you just have to dismiss the story as false altogether. You make up your mind. I accept the story as true, but I accept that it had to happen within the context of realistic limitations. And you had the Tower of Antonia looking down over the temple. If there is any disturbance like that, Roman soldiers would be down there like in a second. But they're going to hesitate to get in there if there's an entire priesthood in on the action. So that makes sense. You can be sure that the New Testament version of the story is at best obscure. And once again, not playing fair with the real history. The Melchizedek theme, we talked about that, the righteous king. The Dead Sea Scrolls talk about their teacher as being called Melchizedek. They refer to this teacher as a Netzer. Netzer was the term for the heir to the throne of David. And we get the sectarian name Netzarim or Nazarene from that, along with the keepers of the covenant and the Zohar Torah. So that'd be Netzarim for the collective plural. Both of these give us our Nazarene sect. So these are all parallels to the Jesus story. And once again, Jesus is called the Nazarene. What else is Jesus called? The Galilean. Well, that was Judah's name, Judah the Galilean. If Jesus is the son of Judah the Galilean, you would expect to say, which Jesus are you talking about? Jesus is a common name. Well, Jesus the Galilean. Oh, okay, that one. Okay, that would make sense. But it doesn't make sense in the New Testament story, because the New Testament story says that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is not in Galilee, it's in Judea. So, and that's where we would expect him to be born. The Old Testament clearly makes the expectations about Bethlehem as being the origin of the future Messiah. And this sect, as we said, was into following everything that the Old Testament was saying. And their idea was that they would make all these predictions happen. They would fulfill it. And we know this when we look at how they treated Old Testament texts in the pesherim of Qumran. They would say, this text says this, and then they say the interpretation of it is, and then they talk about what the sect was doing to where all these things were being fulfilled of that text in the Old Testament. In fact, let's give a sample of that right now while we're here, so we can get an idea. Okay, this is from the Habakkuk pesher. Now, I recommend to our viewers that you get a book called James the Just in the Habakkuk pesher by Dr. Robert H. Ehrman. It is an excellent analysis of this Qumran scroll, and I agree 100% completely with Dr. Ehrman's very astute observations. I think he has made a case that has never been refuted. No scholar has systematically taken on Ehrman's analysis of the Habakkuk pesher and refuted it. Others have said they disagree with it, but they've never ever systematically gone through and given a better explanation than Dr. Ehrman has given of each of those texts. So with that being said, if you disagree with Dr. Ehrman, here's your challenge. Go ahead and prove it. I'm willing to look at another side of the story. If you've got a better case for how that text should be interpreted, I would welcome knowing about it. So in the meantime, I'm going to go on the best research we have so far that accounts for the known evidence. Just denying evidence is not going to work for me. If you can account for all the known evidence, that's what I want in my understanding of the history. And I think that my interpretation does account for it all. Now, let's just get to the Habakkuk scroll. First of all, it starts off quoting Habakkuk 1:13. Why are you staring, traitors, and you maintain your silence when a wicked person consumes someone more upright than himself? Its interpretation, now this, every time you hear those words, you know they stopped quoting the text and they're now about to add their own commentary. And that's what the word pesherim means. It means commentary on these texts. So the Habakkuk pesher means the Habakkuk commentary. So you have a little bit of quoting of the text and a bit of commentary. And the text may be anything, but the commentary is sectarian history. Its interpretation concerns the house of Absalom and the members of his council. I say Sanhedrin there, who kept silence at the time of the reproach of the teacher of righteousness, James, and did not help him against the man of lies, Paul, who rejected the law in the midst of their whole community. Now, that Sanhedrin comment, that James comment, and that Paul comment is my insertion so that our viewers can know who I think is being meant in this text and who Dr. Eisman concurs was meant in this text by his in-depth analysis of the Hebrew and all the other contextual clues. Right there, it goes on, quoting Habakkuk 2:8. Since you pillage many countries, the rest of the peoples will pillage you. Its interpretation concerns the last priests of Jerusalem, Ananus and the sacerdotal aristocracy, in brackets there, who accumulate riches and loot from plundering the people. However, in the last days, their riches and their loot will fall into the hands of the army of the Kittim, the Romans. And then it quotes Habakkuk again, the greatest of the peoples, for the human blood spilt and the violence done to the country, the city, and all its occupants. Its interpretation concerns the wicked priest, Ananus, since for the wickedness against the teacher of righteousness, James, and the members of his council, God delivered him into the hands of his enemies to disgrace him with a punishment, to destroy him with bitterness of soul for having acted wickedly against his elect, James. Quoting Habakkuk again, woe to him who builds a city with blood and founds a town on a misdeed. Does this not stem from Yahweh of hosts? The peoples wear themselves out for fire, and the nations are exhausted for nothing. The interpretation of the word spread concerns the spreader of deceit, Paul, who has misdirected many, building a useless city with blood and erecting a community by subterfuge for his own renown, wearing out many by useless work, and by making them conceive acts of deceit, so that their labors are for nothing, so that those who derided and insulted God's chosen, James, will go to the punishment of fire. Quoting Habakkuk, for the earth will become full of the knowledge of Yahweh's glory, just as water fills the sea. Its interpretation of the word in his, Jesus, return, then there's a gap in the text. Back to Habakkuk. Woe to anyone making his companion drunk, spilling out his anger. He even makes him drunk to look at their festivals. Its interpretation concerns the wicked priest, Ananus, who pursued the teacher of righteousness, James, to consume him with the ferocity of his anger in the place of his banishment, in festival time, during the rest of atonement. And similarly, they commented on the Psalms pesher, 4Q Psalm pesher, did a similar comment. They said, and it's where the Psalm pesher is discussing the same thing as Habakkuk was discussing. It says, be silent before Yahweh and hope in him. Do not be annoyed with one who is affluent, with someone who hatches plots. Its interpretation concerns the man of lies, Paul, who misled many with deceptive words, since they thought up absurdities and did not listen to the interpreter of knowledge, James. This is why they will die by the sword, by hunger, and by plague. I'm quoting Psalm again, Psalm 37. A short while yet, and the wicked will no longer exist. I will stare at his place, and he will no longer be there. Its interpretation concerns all the evil at the end of the 40 years. For they shall be devoured, and upon the earth no wicked person will be found. Now, this 40 years thing, I want you to pay attention that came in the text in the interpretation part, not in the quoting of the Old Testament text part. The interpretation part, remember, is real world. Old Testament text, then they say interpretation, application to the real world. So the Old Testament text, they said one thing, and so then they started talking about the real people in their world, Ananus, or the aristocracy, the Sanhedrin, or Paul, or James, the people in their world. Now they're saying in the interpretation about all the wicked being destroyed, and they're no longer existing, you look anywhere you want, you don't find them, is after the 40 years. And that's in the interpretation in their world.
Right.
So this tells us a dating of the Dead Sea Scroll texts. Obviously, this was written before the 40 years are up. These guys don't think the 40 years are done yet when they're writing this. And obviously, it's after the teacher has already passed, because they're looking back at the teacher, but forward to the 40 years ending. That means the scrolls that talk about all these things, all these pesherim that talk about this, were all written within that time period.
Right.
You say, we're talking about this, these things over here, and it's going to all end up at this time here. Well, that means you haven't gotten to that time here yet. Now, we're well past that time looking back at it, but we can tell when the scrolls were written from this kind of internal evidence, which is why I don't take anybody's push it back or push it forward thing. I let the scrolls tell me when they are written themselves. Why not? It's the only way we can do it.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
just so that viewers know and understand, the wicked priest and the spreader of lies are working together against the teacher of righteousness in a similar fashion to Ananias of Damascus and Paul working together in Acts. And this is the same kind of thing that we see going on with Ananias. Ananias being an enemy of this movement, and he kills James, just as recognitions claims that Paul killed James, and just as the Dead Sea Scrolls says, the wicked priest had killed the teacher of righteousness.
Yeah, I never thought of it before, but in fact, the Habakkuk commentary, in joining the wicked priest along with Paul as being co-conspirators, is powerful support for your thesis.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So that's interesting. In fact, let's take a look at some of the other Dead Sea Scrolls, since people aren't being taught about them. There's a scroll which is one of the original first Dead Sea Scrolls to be discovered, the Cave 1 Dead Sea Scrolls. One of those was 1Q Hodio, or the hymn scroll. Now, these all come from Cave 1, and Cave 1 is recognized as a habitational cave. In other words, this cave, someone lived there along with these scrolls. And this particular cave, it's got the lovely shade of the stone above in this hot desert, and it's got an opening on one side of a large promontory that sticks out over the Qumran ravine, and the wind comes in from one side and blows out the other. So you got this lovely breeze in there in the cool shade of the cave. It's one of the few pleasant places around Qumran where someone could live comfortably. So anybody getting this preferred place had to be high rank. And I suggest that it was the teacher of righteousness, perhaps even the unique teacher himself, who lived there and was writing the scrolls that were there. Now, let's just take a look at some of the things that were written in that hymn scroll that was there, and let the viewer decide for themselves, just like I asked the viewer to decide for themselves, does this sound like rabbis on drugs when I read the songs of the Sabbath sacrifice? Does the following passage in any way evoke images of a character that might have stood at the base of the historical Jesus legends? Could this guy be a candidate? Let the viewer decide for themselves as they hear the words from 2,000 years ago from the Qumran desert. They said, of the vision of knowledge, it is not certain, and of the path of your heart, it's not that. But you, O God, will answer them, judging them with your power according to their idols and their numerous sins, so that in their schemes are caught those who deviate from your covenant. At the judgment, you will annihilate all the men of deception. There will no longer exist seers of delusion, for they do not value me. Even though you exhibit your power in me and reveal yourself in me with your strength to enlighten them, you have not covered in disgrace the face of all those looking for me. For those who unite for your covenant, those who walk on the path of your heart, have listened to me. They have aligned themselves with you in the council of the holy ones. Through me, you have enlightened the face of the many. You have increased them, even making them uncountable. For you have shown me your wondrous mysteries. Me. Could there have been a megalomaniacal, well-learned teacher of righteousness who inspired a group to write legends about him after he was gone? Does this sound like he could be that kind of guy?
Certainly.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Then the passage I keep saying about the 20 years, here's the passage here from the Damascus document, 4Q Damascus A. But they were, and this is column 1, lines 9 to 12 for those who need a reference, but they were like blind men, and like men who groping seek their way for 20 years. And God considered their works, for they had sought him with a perfect heart. And he raised up for them a teacher of righteousness, Jesus, to lead them in the way of his heart, and to make known to the last generations what he would do to the last generation, the congregation of traitors. Yeah. The idea of the way, once again, coming in. We quoted the passage earlier in our last video about he paid attention to the downtrodden, and he paid attention to the orphans, and I say that maybe that's James and Jesus, the sons of Judah the Galilean, after Judah the Galilean died, and that he circumcised their hearts, and he saved them because of his grace, and he led them to the way. Again, the way. It's being used as a common repeated technical term for their religion and their thinking.
Let's take a look at some of these live comments.
Okay.
Pablo says, "Glad to see you doing a live video." Yeah, it's good to keep
Welcome,
doing
Pablo.
these videos. Kawami asks, "Was Philo Logos and Dead Sea Scrolls similar?" No.
No.
Not at all.
Philo was very much Greco-Romanized, Hellenized. Everything that he presented was done in terms of a Greek philosophical school. So, for example, he described the Therapeutai. He said that they had their leader of their sect, their overseer. He didn't say overseer of the sect. He said president of the society, using all Greco-Roman terms.
Yeah.
They mentioned that these sectarians used. Now they didn't say pesherim; they said allegories. But they did let a few clues out that they had a passion for freedom, and there would be no semblance of anybody looking like a slave among them. And as we're all free men, even those who are serving the meals didn't dress like servants who serve the meals. They intentionally, nobody looks like a servant around here. Yeah, and then so you had the nationalist freedom idea, which matches the scrolls. He notes that the women attended the lectures and were present with them. That matches the Dead Sea Scroll community, which admitted women. We find in the second occupation level at Qumran, women were included in the burial grounds. Then they talk about in the Therapeutai the songs of thanksgiving. That's actually a term of the name of one of the scrolls from Qumran. So it matches. And he said that these people were very zealous. That's a key term for them, zeal. Now, that's another thing, zeal. Let's deal with that, because that's an important concept about the original group that stems from their Torah, but it also stems from their social upbringing. These people, Josephus notes that the Dead Sea Scroll community were, he doesn't say Dead Sea Scroll community, but Josephus notes that the Essene sect that he's talking about, and especially the extreme version done by Judah the Galilean, were all Jews by birth. That's important. Jews by birth, says Josephus. They didn't admit foreigners. Jews by birth only. The New Testament preserves a little bit about that idea to the disciples. Jesus in saying, "Go only amongst the cities of Israel, and you won't even have time to get to all them before all this is done." Yeah. So this is very limiting. That's the original context that got changed over later. The Pauline idea is include the whole world. The Pauline view of Jesus is he's a Romanized Savior God. The Dead Sea Scroll view of the Messiah is he is a messianic king meant to restore the rule of Torah on earth and give Jews their proper place of ascendancy on the globe, while all other nations now serve Yahweh as servants. In other words, every other nation becomes a client state of the rule of the kingdom of Judea, and that was their idea of the Messiah. The Messiah stands above everyone else. In our last video, we discussed the idea of Entheogens, and we discussed the Canaanite woman and her bread, the role of the idea of calling them dogs. This fits the Dead Sea Scroll idea. I will take no heathen filth upon my lips, says one of the scrolls. And like I said, Josephus said they're all Jews by birth. So these guys had their own form of racism. It was reverse anti-Semitism. It was pro-Semitism to the point of anti-Gentilism, you might say. It was everything was extreme. By the way, other comparisons to the Dead Sea Scroll community and the original Jesus group, the Dead Sea Scroll community were led by a council of 12, and they had an inner circle of 3. So again, the parallels are absolutely matching all the way along. Anything that we can find as a theme or as a parallel, they seem to match. But the Dead Sea Scroll community, everything they were doing was from a very Jewish point of view. To our viewers, because unlike Philo, it wasn't the Hellenized view. These guys were anti-Hellenism. Paul was pro-Hellenism. It's the Pauline sect that was pro-Hellenism. And Paul was the enemy of this sect. And Paul clearly showed himself to be an enemy of the disciples of Jesus. When you read Paul's writings for themselves, you get an idea of how he viewed the original disciples of Jesus as his personal enemies. And I just want to get to finding that. I found one thing I want to get to, comparing Paul to Josephus in a few ways. Okay, here we go. I'm just going to read this paragraph because I don't have all the textual references in my brain, so I might as well have them here. In fact, I'm not even going to say the text and quote them. Instead of saying Acts 13, Galatians 1, Ephesians 1, I'm just going to say reference. Do I even need to put reference in? I don't even need that. I'll just quote it, and you'll be able to tell when I'm quoting it, because I'll just go like this when I'm quoting a New Testament text of Paul. How's that?
Okay.
Right. Paul was amazing. Paul was extraordinary. If you doubt it, just ask Paul. Jewish scholars and the original disciples would have agreed that the references in the book of Isaiah concerning a light to the Gentiles were meant to describe the Jewish Messiah. Paul tells us this was really a reference to himself. Paul claimed that he was called to be an apostle from the time he was in his mother's womb. In other words, Paul claimed that he was in fact the very first apostle. Am I not an apostle? Even though I may not be an apostle to others, surely I am to you. It is obvious that this was a serious issue for Paul in his day. After the death of Judas, a replacement Judas, the one who hung himself allegedly, a replacement was chosen. To qualify as a potential new apostle, the other original apostles decided a candidate had to have been with us the whole time, beginning from John's baptism to the time when Jesus was taken up from us. Paul was not chosen. In actual fact, Paul did not even qualify to be a possible candidate. Paul said that the people known as the apostles of Christ were actually false apostles in disguise. 2 Corinthians, whatever. Paul describes circumcision as mutilation. Paul rants, I wish they would go the whole way and emasculate themselves. Paul labeled Peter and James and John as men who were reputed to be pillars. They seemed to be leaders. There were those who seemed to be important. Whatever they were makes no difference to me. Those men added nothing. Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this. I am more. Paul claims the summons to Jerusalem was to inform James and others of his mission to the Gentiles. Paul boasted to his Galatian friends that he did not give in to them for a moment. Elsewhere, Paul admits that he did give in to performing Jewish rituals. The details concerning these events, Acts 21, make it clear historical fact that Paul was a liar. Paul lied to James about the message he preached, and he lied about submitting to James.
Right.
So, and not only that, Paul says over and over again, I am not a liar. 3 different times in the New Testament, Paul says, I'm not lying. How many times do you have to say that when you're giving a speech? I'm not lying, I'm not lying. Why do you have to keep saying that? What does that tell you? What does this inform us about that Paul has to keep saying this repeatedly? Just in the small samples we got of his decrepit letters, we got this saved 3 times. How many more times have we had a better
right
saving? It's just amazing. So think about this. Paul has basically as much admitted that somebody must be calling him a liar, and he's defending himself.
Right.
Then we have the Dead Sea sect in the Habakkuk commentary saying one of their enemies who is part of their sect, who left them, who started preaching against the law of Moses, raising up congregations and preaching about blood, it all sounds like Paul.
Right.
He's a liar. They're calling that the guy they're calling the liar.
Yes.
And then Paul says, I knew a guy who used to have these ascent things in one passage, and then he says, he starts talking about in 1 Corinthians 13, this one fellow who can speak all languages, who knows the angels, even talks to the angels, and has all knowledge. Apparently, according to Paul, this guy doesn't have any love, at least not for Paul. But he has all knowledge, he has all languages, and he communes with the angels. That's a description of the Dead Sea Scroll overseer. In fact, that was a requirement of his job, according to the Damascus document. So you had to have that to be the overseer. You had to be a master of all the mysteries of men and all the languages of men, it said. And he was alleged to commune with the angels and knew the angels by name. They even list the 20 chiefs of the fallen angels by name. They even knew their names. Paul says he knew this guy, somebody like that. Now, Paul also says he suspects that this guy didn't love him. Well, this guy he's talking about lived in the Qumran community. The Qumran community called their community Damascus. We know that from the Damascus document, that they called their desert enclave Damascus. Yep. Well, Paul was allegedly converted on his way to where? Damascus.
Yep.
And what was he doing? He had a warrant from the high priest to go and get the followers of Jesus who were living there. Acts chapter 9 says that Damascus was the residence of disciples. And the New Testament also said the disciples kept all things in common. So here's a residence of disciples, and the disciples kept all things in common, and it's in Damascus. And Damascus is equated with Qumran according to their own writings. And it had to be a place in Judea because it had a warrant from the high priest.
I'm going to
It
read
can't be
this.
any other Damascus, because any other Damascus is outside of Judea, and there could be no warrant from the high priest to do anything in any other Damascus.
Yeah. So,
So it has to be that one. So
Joe
now
Whip.
Paul, go ahead.
I was going to read this comment real quick and then you
Go
can
ahead.
continue. Joe Whip says, so was Judas the Galilean Jesus of the NT, New Testament? Confused here. That is, you're referring to Daniel Unterbrink. He thinks, he's the one that thinks that. What's being said here is Jesus is Judas the Galilean's son, and for those that really want to that want to see additional evidence of that, other than what's been given here, I recommend reading the beginning part of the second Apocalypse of James, because it actually says that James, the just, is the son of Theudas and Mary.
Yes, and that's right. And our first video together, we dealt with the idea of the king and the identification of Jesus with king, and the scroll idea that Judah the Galilean was said to have royal aspirations by Josephus. Judah the Galilean was the king according to this sect in his generation, and one generation later, this sect seems to be saying this unique teacher who died and they expect to resurrect. He was the king, and they now we know. It doesn't say that in many passages, except in the one passage where it says wanting for 20 years, and then he sent us this teacher who would show them the way. In that same passage, it says that he was a netzer, and that's the link to the king. Also, Dead Sea Scroll passages say that this teacher, when he resurrects, will destroy all the wicked at the end of the 40 years. And they say that about their king, their righteous king would do the same. So that equates this teacher with the righteous king, because it can only be one: destruction of all the wicked at the end of 40 years. So whoever does it, that person in one place must be the same as whoever's described doing it in the other place, because there's only one person that can be doing it. So again, the link matches. And also the idea, the Son of God title. This is another twist. The New Testament says that Jesus was called the Son of God, and the Dead Sea Scroll community also talks about their messianic leader being called the Son of God, and that's for a Jewish text to be using that kind of language is very impressive, and that's something that matches the Jesus story. Here's a couple things about the from the scrolls about the king. It says in Damascus document fragment 3, column 4. This is from the 4Q Damascus A. The star is the interpreter of the law, who came to Damascus, as it is written, a star departs out of Jacob, and a scepter arises out of Israel. The scepter is the king of the whole congregation, and when he arises, he will destroy all the sons of Seth. So there you go. It's the king that's doing all this destruction. Earlier we had the teacher is the one who's going to do it. Same thing. There, a king shall. This is now from 4Q 252, column 5. A king shall not be removed from the tribe of Judah while Israel has the dominion, for there will not lack someone who sits on the throne of David, for the staff of the covenant of royalty. The staff is the covenant of royalty. The thousands of Israel are the feet, until the Messiah of righteousness comes, the branch of David. For to him and to his heirs has been given the covenant of royalty over his people for all everlasting generations. But once again, the king idea. Just look. Sorry for the silent break here.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
Take your time.
Just to have a. Okay, I don't know really where I want to go with it from that.
Okay.
I'll just read a couple more passages from the scrolls and then because you're not going to get these anywhere else pretty well. So, for you have taught them the basis of your truth and have instructed them in your wonderful mysteries. For your glory you have purified man from sin, so that he can make himself holy for you, so that he can take his place in your presence with the perpetual host and the everlasting spirits, to renew him with everything that will exist and with those who know. This is interesting. This mentioned those who know. In another passage, he mentions the cognoscenti, also another term for those who know. Here's another passage. And we have collected together as a community, and with those who know, before your wonders we shall sing together. Each time they talk about the heavenly ascent experiences, he not only says our community goes, but there's another group that he calls those who know, who are up there. And I suspect that these are the few Gentiles that Jesus approves of, but won't identify by name specifically to anyone else. And they're handpicked by God because they get to go up and see God and go up to the throne room. And if God allows them into the throne room, who is Jesus or anyone else going to object about it if God lets them in? Yeah. So apparently these may be indirect references to some of those who taught Jesus some of his mystery knowledge during his 20-year training period. That's what I suspect. So he makes an exception for them. They're the only people that he thought had an exceptional bit there. Entheogen means a substance that has been endowed by God with the ability to open the door of communication between you and God. And whether that's God within you or you leaving your body and going up to see where God lives himself. So God can either visit you in your body, or you can leave your body and you can go and visit God. Either way, an entheogenic substance may be involved. It may be topical, as in the anointing that the priest used in the Old Testament that actually contained cannabis, or it may be edible, such as the children's bread, which took about an hour to take effect, according to the story of the healing of the Syrophoenician woman. Or it could be in the bread, such as Pliny described of the therapeutai. It could be the kind of bread that was eaten by the sacred meal of the Dead Sea Scroll community. There was a unique meal that was given to those with the highest rank. When they were promoted to the highest rank, they would be allowed for the first time to have a special meal different than the rest of the sect. And presumably this was an entheogenic meal because it gave them the experience of going up and meeting God in heaven. And they thought that was a real event. They were genuinely convinced that they had really gone up to heaven. They really did believe it. Sincerely thought it had happened to them. Yeah, and so that was their only interpretation for the experience that they had had. And we know today that if you take MDMA, or if you have high doses of cannabis, or other psychoactive substances, mushrooms have the same effect, and other fungi do as well, alcohol, or other things that are added to the alcohol. The ancients had a long list, belladonna, the list goes on. Every time I go to try and think of names, my mind goes blank because there's just so many of them. Long list. I recommend you go and get the works of Chris Bennett, Bennett, or Dr. Carl Ruck for some of the various entheogens that were used. There was even an entheogen. Dr. Ruck, along with the inventor of LSD, Dr. Albert Hoffman, and along with a mycologist, Gord Lawson, wrote a book called Road to Eleusis. This is decades ago, over 40 years ago now. But it was the first time that serious scholars, and Dr. Ruck is professor of classical literature at Boston University, an Ivy League university. It's the first time serious scholars were saying psychoactive substances were part of and were very much involved in the functions and thinking of many ancient religions. And they wrote the book Road to Eleusis, describing the mysteries at Eleusis. And at Eleusis, they had a mystery that the ancient Greeks thought was the best thing the Greeks ever had, and it made them far more enhanced and more spiritual. In fact, here's just a few quotes about the mystery religions according to some ancient scholars. Now, these people were not religious fanatics. These people were not grinding the axe for some as devotees of some particular cult. These are philosophers and deep thinkers of the past. And I'll just give you a quote. For example, Cicero, politician, said, "For among the many excellent and indeed divine institutions which your Athens has brought forth and contributed to human life, none in my opinion is better than those mysteries, for by their means we have been brought out of our barbarous and savage mode of life and educated and refined to a state of civilization, and as the rites are called initiations, so in very truth we have learned from them the beginnings of life and have gained the power not only to live happily, but also to die with a better hope." Now, these guys believe there really was another world that's worth going to because of this experience. They now had a better hope because of their mystery experience. The no problem. The Plato said, "It looks as if those who established rites of initiation for us were no fools, but there is hidden meaning in their teaching when it says that whoever arrives in Hades uninitiated will lie in mud, but the purified and initiated, when he arrives there, will dwell with gods." And he says, "There are in truth those who understand the mysteries. Many bear the one, but few will become bakchoi. Now these latter are, in my own opinion, no others than those who have given their lives to true philosophy." Plutarch says similar thing. In fact, Plutarch describes a little bit of the mystery experience. He was obviously an initiate, and he's giving away a little bit more than what you're supposed to actually talk about. And he goes, "The soul at the point of death has the same experience as those who are being initiated into the great mysteries. At first, one wanders and wearily hurries to and fro and journeys with suspicion through the dark, as one uninitiated. Then come all the terrors before the final initiation, shuddering, trembling, sweating, amazement." Just a break. That's typical in ayahuasca experiences before they have their internal healing type of ceremony as well. But anyways, I'll carry on the quote. "Then one is struck by a marvelous light. One is received into pure regions and meadows with voices and dances, and the majesty of holy sounds and shapes. Among these, he who has fulfilled initiation wanders free, and released and bearing his crown, joins in the divine communion and consorts with pure and holy men, beholding those who live here uninitiated, an uncleansed horde, trodden underfoot of him, and huddled together in mud and fog, abiding in their miseries through fear of death and mistrust of the blessings there." The uncleansed horde, people who've had this mystery religion experience, look at this world as a little bit more dismal and not as pure as the holy heavenly world. This comment that those who hadn't had the experience are an uncleansed horde. Well, you can imagine what the Dead Sea Scroll community, they already had xenophobic ideas about outsiders. It would add entheogenic mysteries, which make you look at the uninitiated as an uncleansed horde on top of their view. And they're really going to be isolating themselves. Others like Sophocles, Pindar, Scholias, Pausanias, Clement of Alexandria, Hippolytus, they all made comments about these mysteries, basically giving people hope for a better life, and that they actually believed they'd had an experience that was genuine. So how did that happen, that they had that? Well, it turns out that Dr. Ruck and his associates came up with circumstantial evidence suggesting that lysergic acid amide might have been involved in the mystery religion in Eleusis. And he suggests that since one of the areas of worship was Triptolemus, and he was revered in Eleusis as a judge of the living and dead. When you go to Hades, you would end up standing before Triptolemus's chariot, and he was authorized to decide whether you go to the good part of Hades or the bad part. When they talk about the uninitiated, you go to the initiates part with the gods, or you go to with the uncleansed horde. And Triptolemus would be the decision maker. Here is an image of Triptolemus's throne chariot on a Greek vase. Notice the wings on the chariot and the serpent on the ground. Both wings and serpent imagery are images that are commonly associated with entheogenic mysteries, because they talk about, serpent poison kills you, so that's the door to life and death right there. And a lot of these poisons were worked with so that they could cause an experience that takes you near the other side, but not over the bridge. And so these were part of their entheogenic experiences. Now, another thing, I should point out, look at that again carefully. Notice the grain associated with him. It's a barley that grew all around Eleusis. There's a fungus that grows on that grain called ergot. Ergot has alkaloids in it, 3 different alkaloids that are psychoactive, but 2 of them kill you. Doesn't do you much good. You don't come back from that journey. The 2 that kill you are oil soluble. The one that doesn't kill you, the lysergic acid amide, is water soluble. And apparently their ergot was a water soluble based drink based upon this fungus. This is a quote from a Homeric hymn to Demeter. It says, "And she, Demeter that is, showed the conduct of her rites and taught them all her mysteries to Triptolemus." So apparently Triptolemus was the human recipient of the mysteries of the knowledge of the mysteries of the gods to begin with. So we got Triptolemus sits as a judge on the board of the living and dead. He has entheogenic elements related to him, like the wings and the serpent, and his special grain that's associated with him is the barley. It all seems to fit. Socrates calls him a demigod, a hemitheos, and a judge, a Tikastes of the underworld. That's in Plato, Apologia 41a. Plato mentions Triptolemus in Laws 6.782b as the mediator of Demeter and Kor's benefits, quote, the gifts, Dora, of Demeter and Kor, which Triptolemus or whoever it was handed on to us, end quote. The plural word gifts, that's Dora, certainly incorporates grain agriculture on the one hand, but includes the secret of the ritual drink Kikian, a sibling of the barley consumed during the mysteries. Triptolemus has wings on his chariots and knows the secrets of the mysteries. His grain is clearly barley. A fungus called ergot naturally coexists with barley. Ergot contains lysergic acid amide, LSA, similar to lysergic acid diethylamide, which is LSD. Initiates of the mysteries experience profound visions. Quote, clearly ergot of barley is the likely psychotropic ingredient in the Eleuthinian potion, from Dr. Ruck. So they even knew about a form of LSD back then. So who would know? Yeah. Anyways, these religions all were changed. Paul changed the mystery idea. This is another twist by Paul. Paul changed the mystery element that was always spoken about. And he said the mystery was that the least of all apostles should be given the task of bringing the gospel to the Gentiles. That was the mystery, according to Paul. What a mystery. Yeah, anyways, it's again a distortion. Once again, the same theme, the same idea being discussed now as mysteries being discussed, but it's being twisted in a way that takes it away from the original in the New Testament. Everything is done that way. The themes of righteousness that Paul talks about righteousness by being obedient to the emperor. This is again another twist. That the Ser Hayad, the rule of the community from Qumran, it says that the overseer of the camp is to be obeyed because he was put in his position by God. That's what Paul said about Caesar. So, which sounds more like the original group of a Jewish messianic movement? Which one sounds more original? That the overseer of the Jewish camp in the desert should be obeyed because he's put in place by God? Or that Caesar of the Roman Empire should be obeyed because he's put in place by God?
The
Which one
former.
sounds more like the original Jesus story?
The former. The overseer.
Exactly. Exactly. So we already know that Paul has taken the story and Romanized it in a horrible, obvious distortion of what the original was. And the crazy thing is, when Paul was brought before James uh, and brought in on the carpet, James made it very clear, according to the story in Acts, and this is part of the we document. Acts isn't trustworthy in the early part necessarily, but when you get up to after chapter 16 and into the we document, then you're getting to what seems to be some real record of what was going on there. And even Dr. Eisman would recognize those parts are more trustworthy than the other parts. Well, when we get to that part, we find Paul's called in on the carpet by James, and James makes it very, very clear whether Paul is pro Torah or not, and that's a big issue. And Paul yields to James and does everything James tells him to do. And it basically says that no matter what Paul was preaching or writing to all his churches, when his life was on the line before James, he was willing to just ignore it all, toss it, no matter what he preached or what he wrote, go along with the Jewish version, at least for a little while, until his hide was intact, and he could get away from them. And when he got away from them, tell everybody, I didn't give in to them for a moment. He wrote that afterwards. But yeah, but obviously he did. So Paul can't be trusted. So when you look at the New Testament, you've got the Romanized version. The Dead Sea Scrolls seem to be the original story of the Messianic movement. And I don't know, it's probably long enough for a video. What do you think for us so far?
Yeah, I think so too. We've been here for an hour and 21 minutes and 22 seconds.
Okay. Well,
Wow.
there we go. Yeah, time flies. I didn't even know it's that long, but that's a lot
Spot
of
on.
parallels. If you want, if anybody wishes to email me, I'm going to get a ton of emails here, potpoetry@hotmail.com. Ask for this work. Put the title in there, Reconstructing Jesus, as the title of your email, so I see it easier. And then just send the email to me that you want a copy. I'll send you a PDF. That's pot poetry, POTPOETRY @hotmail.com. Okay? Using pilot language, that's Papa Oscar Tango, Papa Oscar Echo, Romeo Tango. I'm sorry, I did that wrong. Tango Romeo. Why? I'll say it again. Let's start again. Papa Oscar Tango, Papa Oscar Echo Tango Romeo Yankee @hotmail.com. Okay.
Very good. Um, so there's a couple other comments here.
Okay.
Uh, Pablo says, I'm thoroughly enjoying this gentleman's talk. I'm glad you are. I am too.
Thank you, Pablo.
Pet Mark says, Robert Abelaine and Luigi Cascola, I'm not sure if I said that last name right, also defended that Jesus was a son of Judas of Gamala.
Judas of Gamala may be the same as Judah the Galilean. It's obscure. Who knows? It could be. Judah of Gamala. Gamala might be Judah the Galilean's hometown for all we know. We don't know for sure because we don't have any other corroborating evidence. That may be the same person I'm saying. Judah the Galilean had several names. When he first took control of the sect and they came and reoccupied Qumran right after the death of Herod, he also broke into the armory at Sepphoris and armed his followers. So he also goes by the name of Judas Sepphoreus. So you got Judah the Galilean, Judah ben Hezekiah, Judah ben Ezekias. Ezekias is the Greco-wise version of Hezekiah. These are all references to Judah the Galilean.
Brett
Judah the
Forsyth says, I need that timeline of characters, bro, stat. I plan on having a timeline um, when Christopher Lawson returns for another video on next episode. We'll
Let
get a
me hold
timeline
up
of your.
timeline too right here for you. This timeline. Uh, Basically, 7 BCE was a time when there was a stellar event triple conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, the three slowest wanderers, with Pisces in the background. This was 2 years before Herod went into his period of isolation. Uh, Herod went into his last year. He never had any visitors. Nobody, foreign dignitaries or otherwise, would have been able to enter and see Herod in his last year of life. Herod died with a groin infection, and he had a groin full of pus that eventually killed him. So he was having no visitors in his last year. So the whole 2 years thing on the birth story, you're going to go back 2 years before Herod's death and 1 year more, puts it to 7 BC. It exactly matches a stellar event. If Jesus was born at that time period, he would have been 12 years old in 6 CE when Judas the Galilean was crucified at the tax revolt. He would have, it matches exactly 20 years after that when he went public in his ministry. 20 years, 40 years after the 26 CE thing, they started the revolt. 40 years after Jesus was put down, the people who started the revolt were put down.
I would
And
like
it
to
all
get all
matches
that.
exactly.
I would like to get all that in like a image, in a timeline image on the computer on next episode.
Sure.
Um, but all right, guys. Thank you for watching, everybody. Please don't forget to subscribe and like. And there's one more thing I want to show all of you before we close out. Just give me 1 second. And
In a future video, we can discuss the Brothers of Jesus and how they took over after the movement.
yes, that's a must. Okay, so here we are. This is my Patreon page. So if any of you are interested in donating and to support my channel, you have 5 tiers here. I may add more tiers in the future, but that is to be determined. I haven't decided on that yet. Depending on which tier you select, it may contain rewards. The final 3 tiers do. Tier 3 to tier 5 contain rewards. So check that stuff out if you're interested. If you don't want to do monthly donations through Patreon, you also have PayPal. I recently added this in, so PayPal is now an option. You can donate one time via PayPal. That link will also be in the description as well, and it's also available on the YouTube channel in the About section. So if you're interested, I would very much appreciate it. All right, everybody. Until next time, I'll see all of you later.
Thank you.